Welcome and welcome back to our channel, The Sensory Corner, your place for education, parent information, and sensory DIYs. But before we get started, please click like to like our video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for notifications of any new videos that come out each week. This week, we're going to be starting a series on parenting an emotionally complex child. This week, we're going to be focusing on episode 1, where we're going to be learning about the different warning signs of sensory processing disorder. This entire series is going to focus on ADHD, ODD, SPD, autism, anxiety, and many other things. So as a broad category, we're just going to call it emotionally complex parenting. All right, let's go ahead and get started with our warning signs of sensory processing disorder. Let's get going. My son has sensory processing disorder in addition to many other things, but today we're just going to be focusing on the sensory processing part. From this point on, since sensory processing disorder is a mouthful, I'm going to be referring to it as SPD. So if you hear SPD, that means sensory processing disorder. I know that this can make life pretty difficult, so I wanted to share with you some of the warning signs and reasons behind of those warning signs of SPD. I am a teacher and I am going into my 12th year of teaching this year, and I've worked with a variety of children with many different needs and many different situations, and I'm also sharing the things that I've gained through my experience and through all of the research that I've done in order to help my son. So please take this into consideration while you're watching this video. It's very hard to diagnose SPD when a child is younger than 3 because they are all learning about their world at different paces. So as I look back on the things that he did as a baby after his diagnosis at the age of 3, it all makes sense. But at the time, I didn't really think that it was any warning signs. When he was younger, an infant or toddler, he had trouble going into loud rooms or any rooms that were really crowded with a lot of people. He would start crying, he'd put his hands over his ears, and he would immediately act like he wanted to leave. He had to always be bundled up. He had to always be swaddled or in the baby carrier, and he always had to be in movement if he needed to sleep. I had to walk up and down our long hallway to get him to sleep. He had to be in a swing, he had to be in his rock and play, or he had to have someone holding him and rocking him. Some other babies don't want to be bundled at all. They don't want to be touched as much. They're very fussy if they are being held. It just depends on that individual child. As I said, a lot of babies are like that, so it's really hard to say, oh, my child has SPD based on the fact that they don't want to be touched. So it's really, really hard to diagnose before the age of 3. Another thing to look for is developmental milestones. Now, your baby will have a checklist that a pediatrician has you sign and fill out each time you have a checkup, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and so forth, and they're going to be checking for developmental milestones. When did your child do this? When did your child do that? And then they'll let you know if your child is delayed or your child is right where they need to be. Now, some children with sensory processing disorder are delayed in some areas. Just because they're delayed in some areas doesn't mean that they won't catch up eventually, and sometimes children do catch up by the time that they are 3 or 4. And sometimes they'll continue to show delays, and that can also be a sign of sensory processing disorder, but it could be something else. So developmental delays are not necessarily specific to sensory processing disorder. They could be many different things. So that's definitely something that if your child continues to be behind in their developmental milestones, to make sure that you are talking to their pediatrician about your concerns. Now, when they reach the preschool age, 3 to 5 is around, as I said before, they are able to start to catch up, and some of them do not catch up with the milestones. Some of them stay further behind, or they get further behind, and their sensory processing does not get better. This is when major symptoms start to show up. They start to increase in intensity. And this is when I realized my son was struggling with sensory processing, and we all started putting things together. He absolutely hated loud and crowded areas. We went to Disney for the very first time, and as a parent, I want to go and show him everything that I did. I want to do the parades, I want to do the fireworks, I want to go on all the different rides that are age appropriate for him. And we really wanted to show him the parade, but as soon as we got in the crowded area on Main Street, as anybody who has been to Disney World knows exactly how that is. Everybody's close together, it's loud, the music's playing, and he started to have what looked like to me a panic attack. I thought that he was just scared of all the people around us. He started covering his ears, he started crying, and eventually, after telling him it's gonna be okay, this is something new, you're gonna be fine, we're gonna see Mickey Mouse, it's gonna be so exciting. And eventually we ended up leaving, and as soon as we got out of the park, he calmed down. So now that I look back on that, after he was diagnosed, he was being overwhelmed with the loud noises, the crowded people, the unfamiliar situation. He was in a meltdown mode. That is definitely something that was a sign for us, but at the time, since we didn't know what was going on, for us I think he was just a little anxious. Now this is because unfamiliar situations can cause extreme anxiety with children with SPD, and it can result in a serious and what we thought was a temper tantrum, but in reality we found out that it was actually a meltdown. His meltdown would look like hitting, punching, yelling, screaming, scratching, and the longer that we would keep him in that situation, when he was going into meltdowns, that he would progress and it would become worse in intensity. Now this continued after we went to the Disney World. So this wasn't just a one-time thing. This was a continual thing when we were in loud areas and crowded situations and everything like that. To us, it looked like a temper tantrum. From other people from the outside, but once we found out what it was because his brain was in a fight or flight mode, and it was either wanting to run away or it was wanting to attack. So when he was 3, after our Disney trip, he was diagnosed with SPD and everything changed. We did a lot of research, we figured out what was going on, we figured out what his tantrums were not tantrums, that they were in fact something called a meltdown, which is basically when your brain is having too much stimuli. And when he came to a certain point of having all of that stimuli, the sounds, the sights, the smells, everybody being so close to him, he could no longer take in any additional stimuli. Basically, the brain just shut down and cannot take anything else further. And it causes the brain to kind of just fall apart. Now, because the brain is taking in so much stimuli, what it takes in is it's saying that it's dangerous. Now, when our brain says something that is dangerous, we go into a fight or a flight mode. Fight, we are going to be fighting, we're going to be hitting, we're going to be slapping, we're going to try to get rid of that dangerous stimuli. And flight, we're going to run away. So his body was trying to defend itself against the threat. Now, it is important to know that this is not a temper tantrum. It is a meltdown. It is not a battle of the wills. You didn't do what I said. You need to listen. I'm right. You're wrong. This is not the time for that. When their brain is shut down, they are not thinking about what they did wrong, what is going on in their brain. They can't comprehend anything that you're talking to them about, or logic or anything like that. Their main thing is that they are not knowing how to respond to everything that's going on in their brain. So no matter what you do, you won't be able to stop the meltdown unless they're removed from the situation or giving some calming strategies. So if you notice a pattern of this over several months and they're frequent, then it could be a sign of SPD. This is not a once or twice thing for a month. It is consistent, it is frequent, it lasts a long time, and no matter what you do, you cannot calm your child down. Many neurotypical children, they react negatively to be overscheduled, to being stressed, to being exhausted, and as a result, they start to misbehave a little and not act like we want them to. This is not what I'm describing. That is a typical child, and we all know that we get cranky when we're tired. This is on an entirely different level. Now, if you see that your child is consistently grumpy, overwhelmed, stressed, exhausted, this may be something to consider. This is because children with SPD, they struggle with emotional regulation. Here is a quick summary about how executive functioning works in our brain. Executive functioning are things in our brain that help us make daily tasks like planning, time management, task initiation, emotional regulation. Children with sensory processing disorder are typically delayed in some or all of the executive functioning areas. When a child is struggling with emotional regulation, they'll show inappropriate emotions at the wrong times. When they know that they have these feelings, but they will not necessarily know how to control them. They may not also know how to stop these emotions and deal with them. This could result in them being exhausted or stressed out or being overstimulated, resulting in a meltdown again. Children with SPD also thrive on schedules and routines. If you notice your child is struggling with any changes of routines or doing something unfamiliar and it happens all the time, this may be a warning sign. This is because planning is another executive functioning that children with SPD struggle with. They have trouble with coming up with ways of doing things and carrying things out. For us, we say, I'm gonna go over there, I'm going to pick up my toy, and I'm gonna go put it in the bin. For them, that planning in their brain is difficult. So when they're doing something that is new, they have to come out with that plan in their brain to figure out how they're going to respond. That may cause anxiety, and it may result in an emotional response or a meltdown. If you try to keep a consistent schedule and the same routines, and your child responds well to that, and they stop the meltdowns, this might actually be what's going on. So why does this happen? Because children with SPD thrive on routine. That is what they prefer. They can predict what is happening. Their brain can be calm because they don't have to worry about the planning and then task initiation. Changing a schedule or not having a consistent routine is one of the worst things that you could do with a child with SPD. They cannot regulate themselves through the changes, and they cannot cope with it with that lack of emotional regulation. Simplifying your day and making sure the routines are consistent is the way to maintain a balance. One thing that we found was that we cannot always do everything that neurotypical families do. We must avoid large crowds, we must avoid parades, fireworks, things like that on holidays. We do find that SPD kind of responds a little differently depending on the day. Sometimes the responses are less, sometimes the responses are more intense, and sometimes we can do things that we can't, and sometimes we cannot do things that we want to do. So we can sometimes, we can't some other times. Last time we did fireworks, he wanted to be away from the fireworks completely. This last 4th of July, he wanted to be outside without his headphones. So it's really unpredictable.
That is cool.
Mm-hmm. Ooh. See him?
Yeah. Whoa, that was a big one.
Mm-hmm.
That was a giant one.
If they're more reactive, everything could be a trigger to a meltdown because they're getting close to that level of shutting down. They may become angry, frustrated, and unable to regulate their emotions when they're in this state of mind. So to avoid this, keep your child in a quiet, familiar place and keep the routine in place until this passes. That way you can keep them away from the extra stimuli and make that level go down a little bit. Another thing we notice is an emotional extreme. He may be super happy, loving, well-behaved, and then with an instant, he can turn into a child who's super upset and emotionally and completely falling apart. There is no warning. We also noted that when he gets into those modes, his perspective kind of changes as he got older, which is everything is either really, really great when he's in good mood, or he hates everything and will tell you everything bad about a subject when he's in that mood of everything's going to upset him and he's on that line of going out of balance, so to speak. He'll tell you everything bad about that thing and he'll go on a rant for hours. SPD children have also very intense senses. They hear, they smell, they feel, they see things at a much deeper level than we do. My son can hear things that I don't hear very well at all. He hears everything even though he doesn't say he hears it. I know he hears it. And if you can just imagine how exhausting that is trying to take all that extra stimuli in, creating a safe, quiet place in your home where your child can go when they get to this point is really helpful. My son's getting better at telling me when he needs to have that quiet time. That's something that we have been working on for years. Tell me when you're overwhelmed. How are you feeling? With just identifying his emotions and telling him that he needs to go to that safe, quiet place to calm down. He's using this space more, and it helps him regulate and calm down and to return back to where he was before his meltdown. One thing SPD children can struggle with is maintaining their balance or staying centered, like neurotypical individuals do. They always feel like they're on edge or they're going to fall apart at any minute. And this is why it's so important that if your child is struggling with SPD, that you get them the therapy and interventions that they need so they're not struggling any further. If your child shows any of these warning signs or you're concerned your child may be struggling with SPD, definitely talk to your child's pediatrician. They may refer you to an occupational therapist. If you would like to know more information about autism or SPD, click the links above and get more information on them in more detail. Next week, we're going to have our second episode of Parenting Emotionally Complex Children, and we're going to be talking about one of the most important things that you need to have, and that is patience. Check out our channel for more videos just like this. Some are on your screen right now. Also, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell so you can get notifications of new videos when they come out.